Hi, I'm Tom Luna. I'm a former school board member. I was privileged to serve as senior advisor to U.S. Secretary of Education Rod Page. I also had the honor of serving for 8 years as Idaho State Superintendent of Public Instruction. During that time, I also served as president of the Council of Chief State School Officers. One thing I have learned in all these experiences is that educating children is not rocket science, it's more complicated. On my podcast, Swimming Upstream, we will visit with courageous leaders who challenge the prevailing tide and inspire all of us to swim against the current. Let's jump in. Welcome back to another episode of Swimming Upstream with Tom Luna. And folks, we're here at the ASU+GSV conference in San Diego, and we're taping season 4 of Swimming Upstream. We're here in our mobile studio, and so you might hear some background noise, maybe a helicopter fly over or something like that, James. But we're so glad to have James Lane here as our special guest. And folks, James, we're going to learn more about him, but where I got to know James is he's the former state chief superintendent of public instruction for Virginia, for the Commonwealth of Virginia. And currently runs an organization called Educators Rising, which is part of the PDK umbrella. Yeah. So we're going to learn more about that specifically. But James, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, Tom, glad to be here. Excited to talk with you.
Yeah, is this your first year to the ASU conference?
First time I've ever been to ASU+GSV. What an crazy and incredible experience.
Yeah, and, thousands and thousands of people here. Yeah. Hence, we're out here in a mobile booth in the parking lot, basically, right? Because it's the real estate's a premium.
It is,
right?
But it's good. But it's an innovators conference, right?
Really is,
so it's really cool to. I feel like it's one of the only conferences I've been to where I'm seeing what I'm going to see in classrooms in 5 years.
Yeah,
you know, not just what's already in there.
And well, we weren't going to touch on this, but you're right. And artificial intelligence has really captured the imagination, especially of a group like this, where for years and years they've met, and the conversations have been about innovation. A lot of entrepreneurs and innovation and educators that are looking for those kinds of tools and opportunities that can just take education to the next level. And AI is taking the whole thing to a new level.
Oh yeah, it's crazy to watch. I mean, I've seen products that are really going to be game changers for approaches to schools, and I don't just mean instructionally. I mean AI solutions that can make schools safer, AI solutions that can reduce teachers' time in grading, AI solutions that will think through how to better organize schedules, and just really, really cool things going on in the space. And wish I had the money to invest in some of it.
Yeah, you know, and think of it through this lens, James, because you were a state chief. When I was in office, I took office in 2007. And at that time, that wasn't that many years ago, right? But at that time, there was no such thing as a iPad, tablet. There was no such thing as a cloud, and look how much has changed in that short period of time, and it only gets exponentially faster. So it's a fascinating conference, a lot to learn here. But that's not what we're here to talk about. Let's first talk a little bit about you. What was your pathway to becoming state superintendent in Virginia?
Yeah, well, I followed a very traditional pathway. I was, actually coming out of school, I played music. I was a trumpet major in college, and played in some bands that were on some labels. And there's a genre of music on the East Coast called beach music that's pretty popular. So I was playing in some beach bands.
I think of Beach Boys when I hear beach bands. So
so that's more of a West Coast vibe. So on the East Coast, it's more like the Drifters and the Embers and all that kind of thing. I was in the Castaways, which started in the 1950s, so I was the young guy back then, and then decided to come off the road and became a band director. And actually, interestingly, started at a school that the test scores had gotten so bad, the district decided to close the school and reopen it, made everybody reapply for their jobs, and they hired me to be the band director. And took over a band program that had 25 8th graders, and a few years later, over half the school was in band. We were winning competitions throughout the nation, and you know how that goes. And then the principal says, "Hey, you should think about becoming an assistant principal." So, did that for a while. Eventually, became principal, and went to a very small district to be principal because I remember talking to my superintendent, and he said, "What do you want to do with your career?" I said, "I want to be a superintendent." He said, "Well, you're going to have to leave to come back." And so I went out there to be a principal, and he was right. Within a year, they made me principal and assistant superintendent, which was the craziest year of my life. And then the superintendent finally left, and I became superintendent in that district. And that's when it really became about impact for me. And I wanted to, I had turned around some schools that weren't accredited, got them accredited, and I wanted to have that same impact on more kids. And so I thought, okay, let's try a larger district. Let's see if we can't make a difference in larger infrastructure. And like I said, I turned around some schools, and we were able to get that done across multiple schools, and eventually landed in Chesterfield, Virginia, where I was the superintendent of, well over 65 schools. They're approaching like 70,000 kids now.
Wow.
It was just an incredible experience. But the funny story is that the superintendent that said I had to leave to come back, I followed him, and he was superintendent in Chesterfield before me, and so it was a homecoming for me. And I really thought I was going to be there forever. And a couple of years into that, governor called and said, "Hey, love to have you come be the state chief here," and got to do that. And that experience was just incredible. Of course, my time as state chief was COVID and all the other craziness that went with that. And then, but I was honored to be the state superintendent, and I left there and went to the Biden administration, where I served as the acting assistant secretary for elementary and secondary ed, and got to kind of lead K-12 work for the nation. And so I feel in a lot of ways like I've been lucky. I've had some really cool experiences, and I'm proud of what we've done along the way.
I remember fascinating and resume. I remember being in your office and talking about COVID, and you laid out for us. This was early on, but you laid out for us how you were going to deal with what many people were calling school closures. And your plan was really a blueprint for the rest of the country, how learning didn't have to stop when kids couldn't come to school every day, right? And your plan was very thorough, right? And so if you want to talk a little bit about that, but I remember that plan and talking to other state chiefs around the country saying there is a way to do this, right? And you guys had put a lot of thought and effort into this, and was very, very more proactive than reactionary.
Yeah, I think we're the second state to close. So I think Kansas actually was first, and then we went second. And so as soon as we closed, we started thinking about how we were going to reopen, right? Yeah. And I don't know that we all thought it was going to go on as long as it did. And I will say, even with the thorough plans, there are still a lot of districts I wish opened faster. Yeah. But we tried to stay aligned to the research. We tried to stay aligned to the science. But the most important thing for me as a state leader was I didn't want to have kids missing out on opportunities because of this, moment in history where we could have done something to address it. And so we tried to work really hard, and we tried to get them open fast. And like I said, there were some that no matter how much we pushed and prodded and begged, it ultimately ended up being a partnership between us and the legislature to get those schools open. And and then we went right into addressing academic recovery, because there are a lot of kids, even when we reopened, the families weren't coming back, even when the schools were back. Yeah. And so we knew that this was going to be a multi-year issue, and I was lucky enough to then, of course, like I said, go to the Biden administration, where I led our work with the American Rescue Plan, which is, this historic generational funding to address this learning loss. And when I went to the administration, I think like 6% of those funds were spent. Within a year, we got that to well over 40, and now they're on track here in the next few months to spend all of that money. And I think it's going to be important here as we go through these next couple of years to see that these COVID recovery efforts are not going to be 1 year and it's over. It's going to take multiple years, but our state leaders out there are doing a great job, and I look forward to seeing the outcomes as we I think this is one of the years where I think you're going to see that big bounce back, I hope.
Yeah, that's incredible. And this is, I think, a perfect segue into spend the rest of the time talking about what you're currently doing, because one of the effects we've seen of COVID is it didn't necessarily create the problem. It definitely shined a bright light on it, and probably accelerated it. And that's teacher shortage, right?
Yeah.
We've been talking about this for a long time. We could just look at the demographics and see an older population, and teachers older, and the pipeline was not as large enough to fill the retirees that we could see coming. And then COVID just sped that up. And so right now, all across the country, we're dealing with teacher shortages, which can obviously have a huge impact then on the quality of the teacher in the classroom when you're struggling in August to find a math teacher or science teacher, right? And school opens, in 2 weeks. So you're heavily engaged in that work now, in the program Educators Rising. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's actually one of the reasons I left the Biden administration and came to PDK is I wanted, when I left government service, to really work somewhere where I knew I could work with kids again. I missed that since I was a teacher and a principal, and I really wanted to work with teachers again. And Educators Rising, little bit of history, started as Future Teachers of America and Future Educators Association. We kind of consolidated and merged those brands, worked with some groups like the NEA and the AFT and others, along with the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards. And with their advice, we run the program, built out a curriculum that is now a full CTE curriculum that we offer in high schools in all 50 states. And then we pair with that a career and technical student organization, which is essentially the after school and club piece. And we built this full CTE program to train high school students on the techniques of teaching. And I like to say we're convincing high school students to take the education pathway as a journey for their career. And so every year we're in over 1,000 high schools. We have 25,000 kids in the program. But since we launched in 2015, we've had over 300,000 kids come through our program and moving into the field of education, hopefully. And that's why I came to PDK. We always talk about all the different enhancements and innovations that we want to do in education, but at the end of the day, we've got to have a great teacher in every classroom. And I can tell you, I can remember a time when I was maybe an assistant principal, and I would interview for teaching jobs. I'd be sorting through 50 applicants.
Yeah.
By the time I left Chesterfield to become the state superintendent, we'd be lucky to get 1 or 2 applicants for any job, and we'd have vacancies for a good bit. We always opened every school year with every vacancy filled, but you can't imagine the difference in quality and the stress of what it took to get to fill all of those. And then you'd lose somebody the 3rd, 4th week of school for a variety of reasons, maternity, whatever. And it would just be devastating to try to replace those people. And so our mission at PDK through Ed Rising is to eliminate this shortage and to really get kids excited about education. Of course, you have to pair with that some policy work, and we're going to have to improve salaries. We're going to have to improve working conditions. But we start that by just getting kids to see education as a place they can go. The reason we call it Educators Rising and not Teachers Rising is because we also really work to help people understand that there's almost any job you want in the education sector. If you want to be a lawyer, guess what? I had lawyers when I was school district superintendent.
That's right.
You want to be a doctor or a nurse? Guess what? We've got health clinics in our schools. You want to be a coder? Guess what? We've got computer science programs. We've got tech teams. And so there's really, I like to, you want to be a police officer? We've got police officers. We've got firemen. So there's really not a job out there that you can't find a way to your local school division for working. And so we work really closely there. But the other part of our model that's really unique is we are completely grow your own. And this is a stat not a lot of people know, Tom, is that 60% of teachers end up teaching within 20 miles of where they went to high school.
Oh, wow.
And I don't know where the other...
Is that nationally?
That's nationally.
Wow.
And I don't necessarily know where the other 40% go, but if I had to guess, I bet 40% of teachers teach within 20 miles of where they went to college.
I was going to say that would be the other factor, right? Yeah.
And so for us, as superintendent, I remember thinking, I've got to go recruit at the big job fair in the state next door or whatever. And we had some success with that years ago. I remember we get tons of teachers from Michigan and Pennsylvania to come down to Virginia. It's not like that anymore. If you want to fill all the vacancies in your community, you have to start by recruiting kids in middle school and high school from your community. And so we try to, work with our districts to make sure they're working with local universities to make sure that kids can student teach back home. We try to convince districts to offer kids guaranteed jobs when they get out of school if there's a vacancy. And so we build it as a full grow your own. And now, not only with the Pathway to College, but this new apprenticeship movement that's going on, we are a full pre-apprenticeship provider. So we really feel like we're the feeder to any version of the pipeline that's going to get the teacher shortage solved.
Do you work with finding ways for people who decide later on in life that they want to become a teacher?
So, there's obviously a lot of alt-cert programs and ways that career switchers can get in, and there are a lot of great providers for that. We're very intensely focused on high school kids in our high school program. Now, we do have some collegiate chapters, we call it Ed Rising Collegiate, where we'll go into colleges. And the reason we did that, and we don't make that as much of a focus as our high school work for a variety of reasons, but there are partners that do that better. The college work, NEA, of course, the universities have programs. But one of the pieces where I really think the pipeline gets broken is, kids come through our program and they tell us we're definitely going to become a teacher. Then they get into college, they don't take any ed classes till their junior year, they don't student teach till their senior year. Well, the first 2 years of college, they don't really have any experience with education. They don't tutor, they don't work with kids, and we lose a lot of kids in the pipeline there. So we work closely with universities to try to support students in their first couple of years of college so they stay connected to the field, because we think that's essential to the pipeline.
So when you look at the quality of teachers, and you mentioned this earlier, I'm a big fan of Robert Marzano, right, and his work and his decades of research. And I think he's done a pretty good job of using data and analysis to show that there's many factors in the success of a child, but nothing is more important than the quality of the teacher in the classroom. How much we spend per child is important. The number of kids in the classroom, the size of the classroom is important. Family life is important. All those are factors, but nothing more important than the quality of the teacher in the classroom. And so as you look at the issues with teacher shortage and that effect on the quality of the teachers, where do you see the biggest gap in not necessarily quality, because I think that's what you're focusing on, is not just numbers but quality, but the biggest gap in like subject matter area for teachers? When you look at, last I heard there was over 5 to 10 million kids in America that go to a high school that doesn't offer chemistry or calculus because they just don't have the teachers, right? So is there a focus on those specific areas where the shortage is the greatest?
So we made a really intentional decision not to have a subject area focus in Educators Rising. We wanted to give students a broad overview of education. So we teach them concepts around like how to teach students with disabilities, how to manage your classroom, all the way how to set up a competency in project-based learning and all of these really big factors. But what we ultimately decided is that if we wanted to start programs that were just focused on math teachers or just focused on social studies or physics or chemistry or whatever, your classroom might have 1 or 2 kids in it.
Yeah.
But if we decided to focus very generally, and I mean, Tom, you worked in education. If you don't get 18 to 20 kids to sign up for a course, the high school principal takes it out of the schedule.
That's right. Yeah.
And so we really have to put all those kids together. So what we try to do through the career and technical student organization side, more of the after school side, that's where they can get a little bit more intensive. And so yes, we're constantly thinking about how can we get the community's next physics teacher, or chemistry teacher, or AP calculus teacher, or whatever it may be. And so what we do is we try to get kids to tell us what their passions are. I knew I was into music, I was in band, so I knew I was going to be a band director. So after school, maybe I helped out the band director as an intern and helped him write drill or music or something like that for the marching band. And then if a kid's huge into physics or computer science, let's get you in some programs where you can tutor some kids in those spaces, but let's not limit the numbers that we're bringing into a specific subject, because it really gets nuanced when you do that.
And when you mention things like classroom management and those types of things, a lot of teachers leave the profession early because they got all the content knowledge that they needed and to become a teacher and what have you, but they weren't ready for the classroom management skills that they would need and managing those dynamics.
Yeah.
So what you're doing is you're creating a love of teaching, and with those kids understanding that what the content, that there's a place for you to fit in, whether if it's math or science or if it's just general studies or elementary, there's an opportunity there.
That love of teaching is exactly right. Yeah. My national student officers are students, right?
Yeah.
And so we're big on student voice. And I was doing a panel with our national president, whose first name is Milan, and I was asking Milan, how did you know you wanted to be a teacher? What got you excited about it? And Milan said, I was the kid that when I was 5 years old, I'd set my Barbies up and I'd teach my Barbies. and what, whether you're that kid or you don't really know what you want to do in education, but you just want to learn how to teach, our program is there for all those kids.
Yeah. So James, talk to us about, tell us how folks can learn more about the work that you're doing, and maybe even perhaps in their state or in their district, how they can learn more about what you're doing, and maybe look at some of the resources that you guys are offering in the networks you're building across the country.
Yeah, well, first thing I would say is go to our educatorsrising.org webpage. Right there on the front of the webpage, you can sign up to get more information. We'll come out and talk about the program to you. We're passionate about getting this program in every high school in America, and so would love to come out and talk to any district. And then for our district leaders and our state policymakers, there's a number of ways we engage. I mean, there are state legislators that have put in bills to fund us statewide in some states, and then we still go kind of old school door to door, district to district, and try to start new chapters. And all the way to, we've worked with philanthropy to say, let's solve this teacher shortage issue. So we're going to fund, a couple dozen sites in a specific state. So there's a lot of ways that we can partner. But ultimately, whether you use our curriculum or just our current technical student organization or whatever, what we know is you're more likely to fill the vacancies in your community if you're growing students from within, because they're going to come back to you anyways. And I talked about the statistics around that.
You did it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
The superintendent of the district that you started teaching in.
Well, yeah. Started my administrative career in, but yeah. I mean, and to be honest, even I went to high school in Wake County. Had I not gotten married and moved to Virginia, no question in my mind I'd have ended up in Wake County.
Yeah.
Where I was, and so that's what we want to do. We want to help you find people in your district, and it doesn't take a lot. You go to our website, you give me a call, email me directly. This is what we think about every day. We're going to help you get there.
All right, great. Now, James Lane, the former Superintendent of Public Instruction for the Commonwealth of Virginia, and thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, glad to be here, Tom.
One of the things we do, I gave you a little bit of a warning, but you had time to think about it. Share with all of us one piece of trivia about Virginia that, or information that most people wouldn't know.
Yeah, I was just thinking about state superintendents and policy and all of that. Virginia is one of the only states where the governor is not allowed to run for re-election, which is really interesting. We have one-term governors in Virginia, and so as a state superintendent, you're appointed for the term of your governor.
Oh yeah,
and by the governor.
So it's not just the governor; it's all the appointments the governor makes. Maybe I hadn't thought about that, and most people hadn't, but Yeah, so when I got appointed, I knew that we were not running for re-election. We were not trying to do 8 years like a typical thing. We had 4 years to get the work done, and so we worked really hard. We worked, we knew that we were on a timeline, and there were things we wanted to do to innovate our school district, and we got it done. And of course, in the middle of all that, we had COVID crises and a million other things that slowed down some of the progress that I wish we could have had without COVID. Yeah. But that is the one trivia question about Virginia a lot of people in education don't know, is that every 4 years we tend to have a new state chief. Now we've had a couple. We've got a legend in Virginia, Pat Wright, who did a few terms. As state superintendent.
Yes.
So under multiple governors.
Yeah. But most of us, 4 years.
Pat was there when I was in office. I remember, and then you came in. I remember meeting you when she transitioned out.
Yeah, shortly after. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you look at these dynamics of your governor and in that short time frame that they're in office, and the fact that you're only there for 4 years with them also, then it takes out the whole re-election and trying to make decisions based on being re-elected versus making decisions based on what's best and what you promised to do in your campaign.
That's right, and we spent a lot of time trying to meet our governor's campaign promises, even in spite of COVID and some of the other things that we dealt with. But you're right. I mean, I worked in other administrations later and before where we were thinking about re-election and how these things would impact it. But in Virginia, that wasn't part of our thought. It was, and our governor actually said this was going to be the last job he ever ran for, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he was a doctor. He wasn't trying to go to higher office or anything else. And so, we really worked hard to meet that governor's vision.
Real quick, does that go all the way back to Thomas Jefferson? Is that when they at the very beginning of the Commonwealth, or sounds like Thomas Jefferson.
I don't know that I know that history. I'm wondering if it goes back to the House of Burgesses,
all
of that. But certainly, I can't think of, Well, we did a new Constitution. In the 20th century, so I bet it at least dates to that.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, James, thanks for being on Swimming Upstream. Thanks for your great work in Virginia at the U.S. Department and now with Educators Rising.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
We're excited to learn more. Thank you for listening. And remember, our children may only be 22% of our population, but they represent 100% of our future. If you found this conversation valuable, subscribe to our YouTube channel and find us on your favorite podcast platform. Swimming Upstream is part of the Strategos Podcast Network. To view the entire lineup of our shows, visit our website, strategosgroup.com.